Hello you two, it is Tuesday the 9th of February and today we are going to do some comprehension. We're nearly at the end of your book, so we're going to do our second to last text today. Our learning question then today is can I answer questions on a fiction text? We're back to fiction, we're back to a story, okay? So we're thinking about a fiction text today. If we look at our question types then, we've got some retrieval questions where we will need to pick the answer out. We've got some inference questions where we will need to use the clues that we've read about and have a think about what they might mean. We've got a couple of questions on vocabulary today. So remember, vocabulary is thinking about the words that we have read and maybe thinking about the meaning of those words. And then at the end, we are going to give our opinion about what we have read to decide and explain whether we liked it or not. We have to give a reason for our opinions. Okay, let's look at our text then today. Our text is a story called The Selfish Giant, and it says on your page that it is an adapted version of The Selfish Giant by an author called Oscar Wilde, who's a very, very famous author. And it is a story that was written a little bit of a long time ago. It's not a new story. And because it says an adapted version, adapted means it has been changed a little bit. If you adapt something, it means that you change it a little bit. Okay, and I found a front cover of the story. We can see our giant at the top, and we're going to start by thinking about the vocabulary. We're going to start by thinking about the vocabulary in the title. So the giant is a selfish giant. I would like you to have a little chat with your grown up. What does selfish mean? What does selfish mean? And then we're going to try to make a little bit of a prediction. If you think and you know he is a selfish giant, what might he do if he is selfish? So I want you to make a little bit of a prediction. What sorts of things could happen in our text, in our story today? What kinds of things might the selfish giant do? Have a little read, chat about selfish, and see if you can make some predictions about this giant and about this story. Okay, so you have a go at that now. So the word selfish then, it's not a very nice word, is it? If someone describes someone as selfish, they're not saying that they are a nice, kind person or character, are they? So if someone's selfish, they just want things for themselves, don't they? They don't think about other people. They're not sand and rock, are they, if they're selfish? Because we know if we are sand and rock, then it is nice to be nice. If you're selfish, it means you're perhaps not nice to others. It perhaps means if you're selfish that you keep things for yourself and you're not good at sharing, doesn't it? Those are some of the ideas that you came up with for selfish. So maybe we're going to be reading about some selfish things that he does, some things where he is not kind to others. Could be maybe a little bit greedy if you're selfish because you don't want to share things. Have a little read in a minute. Okay, we're going to think then today, part of our vocabulary, because selfish is an adjective, isn't it? Selfish is an adjective. And in our text today, in our story, we're going to come across lots of different adjectives. And we're going to need some of them for our answers in our questions today. So what we're going to do first as a little warm-up, we're going to take our whiteboard and our pen or some paper or something to write on, or even just chat about it to your grown-up, and we're going to see if we can come up with some adjectives. Now remember, adjectives describe nouns. We're going to think about that more towards the end of the week when we do a writing task. Okay, so adjectives are words that can describe nouns, and nouns are just objects or things. So we're going to think and see if you can come up with maybe 10 different adjectives. Now, adjectives can be size words. So, for example, I might use the word large. Large would be an adjective that describes size. Adjectives can be colour words. So I could use, if I was describing the sky, I might say the sky is blue. adjectives can describe a character, what a person is like. So kind would be an adjective. Okay? And adjectives can also describe what something looks like. So I might say that a cat, instead of using a colour word, I might say a cat is, let's see, think of a good one. So I could use a size word, I could use a colour word, I could use an adjective to describe what kind of character or person something is, or I could do what it looks like. So I'm going to choose, oh, I think the cat might look scary. Oh, it might look fluffy. I would like you to see if you can come up with on your board 10 different adjectives. Okay, you might want to have a little look around your room where you are now, see what objects and things you can find and what words you might want to use to describe them. You might want to think of some people, maybe your friends or your family, and think about what adjectives you could use to describe those. And then ask your grown up to send us a photo of all of your super adjectives. So you can write adjectives in the middle, and then around the edge, you can have a little go at writing some down. Okay, that's your first task, your little warm-up activity, because we are going to need to think about adjectives for our questions today. Okay? Sure, you did a really, really super job at that. We're going to think about some tricky words now that we might come across in the text. Now, this word is the word poor. Now, we know O and R makes an O sound, and the word poor has got two O's and an R. So it is the word poor. P-O. Now, poor can mean the opposite of rich. Okay, if you've not perhaps got lots of pennies, we might describe characters as poor, but also poor can be used to describe maybe somebody who isn't very happy, or if there's a character that we feel sorry for, we might say the poor man. Okay, the poor man. That's one of our tricky words for today. Oh, this is one of our tricky words, and this has got a tricky bit at the end because it's got a silent letter. Now, I bet we know from phonics that AU makes an O sound. Aut, autumn. We don't say the N for that one. It's a silent N, and that is autumn, like the season that comes before winter. Okay, but we know that one. That's one of our tricky words that we've practiced. That's looked, isn't it? Looked. It's got ED. It can sound like a T at the end. Looked. We've had that one before. So the A can make an E sound. That would be the word any. So this is the word many. Well done if you got that one. Oh, okay, now this is one we can break up into two parts. So we've got tricky word at the start. This part says no. Got another tricky word. Remember what it is when it's got the H in. It's not were, it's where. Put them together. This word would be nowhere. Well done. Okay, I'm going to have a little look at our text then today. So you might want to get your booklet out and have a little follow through with your finger. I'm going to do it in little parts today. So I'm going to read the first part, and then I would like you to read the first part. I'll do the second part, and so on. So we'll do it like that. So we've had a little listen and a little read of ourselves. So your text today then, it's the next text in your book, and it's on page 30. Okay, on page 30, the selfish giant. Okay, so get your text out if you would like to follow with your finger. I'm going to read the first part up until we've got this big capital letter bold writing. It says, every afternoon the children played in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass and beautiful flowers. The trees were full of birds that sang sweetly. One day the giant came back. He had been away for many years. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. Now remember, he's a selfish giant. Do you think he's going to like the children playing in his garden? What "What are you doing?" he shouted furiously. Furiously means you're really cross, you're really angry, doesn't it? And the children ran away. "This is my garden," said the giant. "I won't let anyone but me play here." He built a high wall around the garden and put up a sign. "Keep out," he wrote on his sign. Okay, so I'd like you to do now, see if you can read that part. And I would like you to pay attention when you read it to how you would speak like the giant. So we've got our speech marks, our inverted commas, to show a couple of things that the giant has said. What I would like you to do when you read that out to your grown-up is I would like you to think about how you would use your voice to read the giant's lines. Because sometimes what we can do when we're reading the speech is we can think about how that character might speak, we can think about how that character might be feeling, and we can use expression in our voices. Because if it says he shouted furiously, we're not just going to read, "What are you doing?" He shouted furiously, because that isn't any expression, that's not getting into character. I'd like you to have a little read of that part, and then I would like you to think about how the giant would be speaking. Maybe if you do a really, really super job at reading those speech sentences, maybe your grown-up might like to take a video of you doing them, and we would love to see how you are reading those lines of speech as the giant. Okay, so you have a go, and then we'll come back to the next part. I'm going to keep reading the next little paragraph now. "He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had nowhere to play." So that was our tricky word, poor. The poor children, and they're poor because they're feeling sad. The poor children had nowhere to play. They stared up at the wall and talked about the beautiful garden inside. Then spring came and flowers bloomed all over the country. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds didn't want to sing in the garden as there were no children and the trees forgot to blossom. So when the trees are blossoming, it means when their flowers open up, doesn't it? And the lovely petals come out on the flowers. So spring came everywhere else. The gardens were blossoming, the flowers were coming out, the birds were coming out. But in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. "I don't understand why spring hasn't come," said the selfish giant as he looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." I have you to pause it then, have a little chat with your grown-up, see if you can read that section now. So from the keep outside up until the next part of the giant speech, I'd like you to see if you can have a little read and have a chat with your grown-up about what you think is happening. Why do you think that the spring has not come to the giant's garden? Have a little think about what's happened and see if you can decide. Okay, and then what I would like you to do is read the rest of the text. Okay, so have a little read at the rest of the text, and then we'll come back and we'll chat about what we've read. Okay. Did you have a little chat? Did you have a little chat about why the spring hasn't come? Did you say maybe that the spring hasn't come because the giant is selfish and he's not sharing his garden? So because there are no children and the garden's not a happy place, then spring hasn't come. Let's see what happens. We'll read the next part. Hopefully you've given it a read already. But spring never came, and neither did summer or autumn. One morning the giant heard some lovely music. It was a small bird singing outside his window. Then the snow stopped falling and the wind stopped roaring. The wind was roaring before, it was making a loud sound. "I think spring has finally come," said the giant as he peered out of the window. What did he see? He saw a wonderful sight. The children had crept into the garden and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. The trees were so glad to have the children back that they had covered themselves with blossom. Birds were twittering with delight. So delight means you're really, really happy. So the birds were twittering with delight and the flowers were in full bloom. Hey, so what had happened then? Little chat with your grown up. What had happened? So when the garden was a sad place, because the giant was selfish and wouldn't share his garden, it stayed winter and it stayed cold, and all the lovely things of spring and summer never came to the giant's garden. The giant's garden stayed a sad place. But then at the end, the children had crept back in, and the garden had become a happy place again because there were children there enjoying the garden. So the trees blossomed, the birds came back and started singing, and it was a happy place again. I had a thing. I wonder what you think might happen next. I wonder what you think the giant might do. Do you think the giant's going to let the children carry on playing in his garden? Do you think maybe the giant has learned a lesson? Have a little chat, give it a pause. What lesson do you think the giant might have learned in this story now? Hey, did you say? Maybe you said that the giants learned the lesson that if you're not kind, if you're selfish and you don't share the good things, then maybe you're not going to have a happy time. Maybe good things aren't going to come because you're not a good person. So maybe by being kind and sharing and being a good person, things are much happier and life is much nicer, isn't it? Maybe you said some of those things. I would love to see what you thought or hear what you thought about the text. We're going to have a little look at some questions then now. So we've done our reading part. So we're thinking then about words, and this practice question is very similar to one of your questions in your booklet today. Write a word to describe how the children felt when they were playing in the garden. It says a word. We just want one word. How did the children feel when they were playing in the garden? Now, what we're not going to do is we're not going to just guess and try to remember. We're going to go back and we're going to look for some evidence, some clues in the text. So this is like a retrieval question and also a bit of, an inference question. And also a bit of a vocabulary question. Okay, so we're not going to find a word that is in there necessarily, but we're going to use the clues to work out how we think the children had felt. So a little bit of inference there. So let's go back to our text. And they were playing in the garden at the start, weren't they? So we need to go back to the start of the text. And I'm going to read a couple of sentences around the part where they were playing in the garden. Okay, so it says the children played in the giant's garden. They did it every afternoon. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass and beautiful flowers. The trees were full of birds that sang sweetly. So we know that the garden is a really, really lovely place. And we know that they came every afternoon. So do you think they felt happy when they played in the garden, or do you think playing in the garden made them feel sad? Made them happy, didn't it? It made them happy. Now you might want to think of an adjective, going back to our opening activity, our warm-up, you might want to think of an adjective that might mean the same as happy, because sometimes what we do is we try to use adventurous vocabulary, don't we? We try to use more interesting or more exciting vocabulary, and we call those, we said before, they are synonyms, aren't they? So words that mean the same but are different words. So write a word to describe how the children felt when they were in the garden. I think I'm going to go for cheerful, because that means happy, but it's a different word, isn't it? So cheerful. You might want to write a different adjective, a different feeling word on your board to describe how you think the children felt in the garden. Okay, now this is another vocabulary question, and it asks us again about adjectives, but this time we've got to find and copy two adjectives. So this one is a retrieval question, and it's also thinking about the vocabulary in the text, but we get to copy them down this time. We don't have to think of our own. Find and copy 2 adjectives that describe the giant garden. 2 adjectives that describe the giant's garden. Okay, so we're going to go back to our text, and we're going to go back, and we've just read about the garden, haven't we? I can see the word garden there, so that's our key word from the question, and it says it was a large, lovely garden. So I'm going to copy down, it says find and copy large and lovely. I have retrieved those adjectives from the text by finding the keyword and finding the right part of the text. Large, lovely. And because we've used 2 adjectives, what we call a 2A sentence, there is a comma in between them, isn't there? Okay. Let's have a think about your questions then today, and then we'll explain what our challenge is. So, question 1. Oh, now this is very similar to the one we've just done. Find and copy 2 adjectives which describe the grass in the giant's garden. The grass this time. Number 2, what do you think furiously means? We have chatted a little bit about that word. And that word, remember, is in inverted commas. It's in speech marks. So we know that that part is in the text. So you can find that in the text. Read the sentence again that's got the word furiously in and see if you can write what it means. So you would write it means and then explain. Question 3. Question 3 says, write down a word to describe how the children felt when they left the garden. It's very similar to our practice question, but this has got 2 parts. It says explain your answer. So the children felt something. You're going to choose an adjective to describe how they felt. The children felt something, and then you've got to explain your answer. So you might use because in that one. So for our practice one, I could have said the children felt cheerful. The children felt cheerful when they were playing in the giant's garden because it was so beautiful. So we're going to choose a word and then explain your answer. Why is the giant described as selfish? I bet you're going to do a good answer for that one because we've chatted about what selfish means. We've chatted a little bit about what he does in the story to show that he is selfish. Question 5 then says, what does this story teach us about being selfish? And quite often stories do have a message in them. They give us some kind of message or moral. So what does this story teach us about being selfish? Well, think what happened when the giant was selfish. Okay, what happened? So what might we have learned? We chatted about what the giant might have learnt about from the story. And question 6, you need to give your opinion. Question 6 says, did you like this story? Why or why not? So I did like the story because, or I did not like the story because. You've got to give some evidence, give a reason for your opinion. Okay, sure you're going to do a super job about that one. If you are whizzing through and ready for a super challenge, I am going to ask you today to write a description of the giant. Doesn't tell us much about the giant apart from that he is selfish. So can you write your own description of the giant? Try to use 2A sentences. So go back to thinking about adjectives. What adjectives might you use to describe the giant? You could describe his appearance, what he looks like, and also describe what kind of person he is. See what other adjectives you can use as well as selfish. See if you can do 3 sentences to describe the giant. Okay, I'm just going to say a big well done to Penny because you always do a super job at your challenges. I always really, really enjoy reading yours. So well done, a special well done to Penny. Okay, have a great comprehension on Tuesday and we look forward to seeing what you get done. Well done, you two.